Welcome to Extropy On Air, the podcast from Extropy Advisors, where we dive into the world of AI, digital transformation, and the future of business. Each episode will bring you perspective from leaders, innovators, and experts across industries, all focused on helping organizations and, more importantly, people thrive in a changing world. Let's get started. Good to see you again, Mike. I know in our last episode, we talked a lot about why digital transformations will fail for organizations. One of the things I think was interesting is we introduced a word that most executives don't typically use when they talk about finance or operations or enterprise systems. That word was entropy. So
Yep.
we defined it as kind of a slow drift toward disorder within an organization, quiet accumulation of complexity, if you will. The way fragmentation builds beneath the surface while dashboards still look green across an organization, that we all have seen that within our careers.
Definitely.
Today, we're going to build on that foundation, though, a little bit, because in Entropy, it explains why transformations break down. Then we need really an opposing force, a different way of thinking about how organizations kind of grow stronger instead of just more complex. With that, Mike, let's go ahead and start at the beginning. I mean, when we use the term entropy and extropy as a metaphor, what are we really borrowing them from? I know you like to get into some of the scientific around this, so let's kind of bring that down the level for the listeners.
Well, whenever we have this conversation, I always like to point out I started as a science major before I went to business and IT. It's definitely closer to my heart. When we think about entropy, that originates in thermodynamics. It's a word used to describe the natural tendency of systems to move towards disorder unless energy is applied to maintain the structure. That's the scientific definition. What it means is if left alone, things will decay. What's fascinating about that is that, in my experience, organizations behave the same way. Their strategies shift, processes diverge, the metrics multiply and shift, the technology stacks are expanded. If nobody's intentionally reinforcing the coherence of all these things, we get fragmentation. That becomes the default state. Then if we think about extropy, that's the counterforce. That represents the intentional order, the design coherence, the structure within all the complexity. That distinction matters because to me, it reframes leadership.
You're exactly right. If entropy is that natural decay that you talked about, then leaders are not just operators, they're architects of order, if you think about it that way. So, which means that transformation, it's not always just about implementing change. It's about continuously resisting that concept of entropy. That alone shifts the conversation of where we want to go. So the language is a big part of it because language really shapes behavior in many instances. When we talk digital transformation, automation, modernization, optimization, I mean, they all sound forward thinking, but I think with all of them, you're left with a little bit of a feeling of incompleteness, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, to me, they're more output focused words. They're not structural. So, when I hear an executive say digital transformation, 9 times out of 10, they're talking about system implementation. They want to put a new piece of technology in place. When they say automation, they're thinking labor efficiency. When we hear optimization, it's around cost compression. We're focused on the output of these things versus the process to get there.
But that language being so project oriented, the mindset, then it almost becomes a little episodic if you think about it. You select a tool, you implement a tool, you stabilize a tool, you declare victory at go live, but entropy doesn't care about your go live date, does it?
It doesn't. If you think about it from the scientific term, entropy is a constant. It's always there. It requires a constant force against it. So if you're thinking about entropy as an episodic event where it's happening during a project or shortly after a go live, you're always going to be behind. That's why organizations find themselves reinvesting in transformation every few years. It's not because the tools failed. It's because the structural coherence wasn't enforced. There was no sustainment of the changes. People reverted to the old ways. They didn't adapt as processes had to evolve.
Yeah, you're right. This is where it starts to get interesting too, because traditional transformation language, it does assume progress is very linear. Well, it's implement, it's improve, it's in scale, but in reality, complexity scales exponentially. Especially when you talk about companies that are very global in their operations. They go through a lot of acquisitions. They might live in hybrid workforce type environments. And now when you start to layer AI on top of all these legacy systems, and it just compounds on itself, right?
It does. I think AI is a perfect example. AI is really there to amplify whatever structure already exists. If your data governance is weak, you're going to have bad results. I mean, how many times do we hear probably 2 years ago as AI was ramping up, get your data ready. Bad data is going to give you bad results. But really that's not a one-time thing. That data always needs to be clean. That process always needs to be rethought. If your process architecture is fragmented, AI is always going to be fragmented. It's not neutral. It magnifies the design of whatever you're inputting to AI.
Yeah, and that also means the transformation language that focuses on tools, it obscures the real issue. I mean, it's not about what you implemented, it's about what you reinforce around these things. Let's dig a little bit deeper into scaling. I'm like, you know, entropy it accelerates as organizations grow. Any leaders will see that. The mergers and acquisitions that we talked about, the global expansion. Maybe you're introducing a new product line. You've got platform proliferation that's happening across the enterprise. Why does scale so often introduce so much disorder instead of practical advantages you would think it would provide for the organization?
That's because growth multiplies the interaction points. Every time that happens, you need realignment. Think about, you've gone through a finance digital transformation. You've gone through all the optimization, all the words we've talked about. Then you bring on a new contract management system, or you bring something else in outside of finance. That's got data that needs to be incorporated into your process. That alone has multiplied your data points. When we think about these different interaction points, you have it between system to system, you have it between person to person, and you have it between system and person as well.
So you get that scale without design. It really does increase the complexity faster than capability even.
Yeah, and that's why some organizations feel slower when they're $5 billion in revenue than they did at 500 million. It's not that they lost talent. It's that the complexity is just, it's overwhelmed the coherence.
That's a great point. It also explains why digital transformation often feels a lot harder in mature enterprises than even in startups sometimes. I know startups they're naturally coherent because they are small. Their decision paths are much shorter. The accountability is extremely clear. But as these organizations grow, that entropy does grow with them. So unless Extropy is deliberately engineered, this is a hole that a lot of organizations are going to find themselves in. Let let let's shift to the good side of this now, Mike. Let's shift to Extropy, not our organization Extropy Advisors, but the term Extropy, because this is where the optimization lives. I mean, if entropy is decay, then Extropy naturally it's compounding advantage. I don't know if we need to get quite as scientific at this time, but let's really explain what that means.
So an extropic organization strengthens relationships over time. Relationships between systems, relationships between people, and relationships between people and technology. It improves not just the tasks, but the way that the tasks all connect to each other. So data improves, decisions improve. When decisions improve, the processes become more simple. When processes simplify, predictability gets more frequent. And when you're more predictive, then you get a lot more strategic around those predictions.
We've mentioned the term a few times, but that whole concept of coherence. I mean, Extropy really is going to increase what we'll call the coherence velocity, if you will. So this is going to be the speed at which an organization can absorb all that change without getting into the challenge of really destabilizing itself.
Coherence velocity, that's a powerful concept.
Yeah. Thank you. Made it up myself.
Let's think about that. In a high entropy organization, every change creates a ripple effect. There's fire drills, exception handling, workarounds, thousands of Excel spreadsheets. In an extropic organization, change integrates a lot smoother because there's architectures and there's an architecture to absorb it.
Without a doubt. Honestly, that's one of the reasons that we really position ourselves as Extropy advisors as system designers. I mean, we're not just optimizing features, we're designing compounding advantage for every single client that we work with. So if we could, Mike, let's bring this back to leadership just a little bit. I'm a CFO, I'm a chief operations officer, a transformation sponsor, whatever title you might have. How do I adopt this lens tomorrow inside my own organization?
The first thing is we have to redefine success. Don't put all the focus on a deployment. That type of thinking is back on old school on-prem ERP days where just getting to the finish line was the victory. We really need to start measuring coherence. Ask, did this initiative, did it reduce the friction in the organization? Did it clarify accountability? Did it improve system integrity? And then second, elevate the architectural ownership. A lot of times there's one person who's considered the power user or system admin for a system or a process, but you really need to go beyond that, just putting it on paper. Somebody really needs to own the system design beyond the individual projects, beyond the go live date. And then third, I would embed coherence reviews into the governance process. Every new initiative should be evaluated not just for ROI, but for its impact on the organization and the organizational process.
Those are all three really good points. I'd maybe add a fourth. People need to consider about investing in kind of a diagnostic maturity, if you will, because entropy, it always leaves signals before it causes that true failure. I mean, it's going to foreshadow itself. So shadow reporting, conflicting KPIs, manual exception spikes, over-reliance on tribal knowledge. These are all early warning indicators that you can get in front of by putting some again, what I call diagnostic maturity in front of the process.
That's the bright side of this conversation. There's the fact that failure is predictable, which means that prevention is possible. If we set proper success criteria at the onset of a project, we've got a quantitative way to measure the impact and good or bad of what we've done. There's nothing wrong with going through a project and understanding we need to come back and continue to optimize it to get to where we wanted versus just calling it a day and moving on to the next one.
I love that lasting thought there, that prevention is possible because you're absolutely right. If we crystallize it a little bit, transformation, it's not tool selection. We've gone over that multiple times, but it's just not tool selection. It truly is overall system design. And I mean, that means defining decision architecture well before you start getting into workflows and things like that. It's defining governance before you define traditional automation. It's about defining in many instances, just the accountability within your own organization, even before you get into looking at analytics of tools. So again, these are all some of the precursors I would think to any success.
The other one is understanding that entropy never disappears, whether it's 2 months after a project or 2 years after a project. Leaders need to continuously apply energy to maintain that coherence. And that's not a flaw of the process. That's how leadership works.
Yeah, that's a great point. This episode, the idea is to kind of reframe the lens. So we've defined entropy. We've introduced the concept of extropy. We've challenged traditional transformational language, if you will. We've positioned transformation as system design. So as we move forward, Mike, in some of the upcoming episodes, we're going to make this a little bit more tangible for our listeners as well. That's going to be our intent. We're going to explore how entropy specifically manifests inside finance organizations. So where CFOs unknowingly tolerate structural decay. Again, most have felt it within their organizations. We're gonna help bring that to life a little bit. We're going to examine how to diagnose entropy inside things like accounts payable and purchase to pay and order to cash, all the ecosystems that we see as kind of the core foundational elements within the office of the CFO. We're going to unpack AI and can it either amplify entropy or accelerate Extropy. It can certainly do both of those depending on, again, on that architecture and how you do that system design. So we'll certainly focus on that. We're going to introduce some practical frameworks leaders can use to increase the coherence velocity, that term that we made up a little bit earlier inside their own organization. So again, this series isn't designed to just be theoretical, although we will give you some of that science stuff to start. It really is going to be much more architectural. So that architectural compound, that's the work. So with that, thanks for joining me to talk a little bit about this today, Mike. We'll look forward to the next episode.
Looking forward to it, Kevin. It's going to be a good conversation series.
Appreciate it, Mike. Thanks again for joining us, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to Extropy On Air. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode, and connect with us at Extropy Advisors to continue the conversation on AI and digital transformation. Until next time, I'm Kevin Zirkle, and this has been Extropy On Air.